What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, September 21st, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions. And before we get on into it, I just have a personal kind of a comment to make. What a week it has been, but then what a year it has been. And just looking back on the last several days, just all the craziness that's going on here. And I agree with those people who say something has to happen. Something big has to happen. It just can't go on with this insanity the way it's been going on up until now. What is going to happen, we don't know. But it just feels like it's reached a breaking point somewhere. Either the wars, the economy, the political structure, something. But it just seems to be spiraling completely out of control here. All right, let's start with the war zones. And we're still dealing with the aftermath of that shoot down of the Russian Ilyushin-20 electronic warfare aircraft as it was approaching the Maiman Air Base in Syria. And apparently it's been confirmed the Israeli F-16s scrambled to cover behind the Ilyushin because they were being painted by the Syrian air defense radars. Now, Israel is now claiming that the Ilyushin was shot down after the Israeli planes turned around and left. We're still not seeing hard information on that, but everybody's pointing fingers and trying to duck the blame on that. But it has come on out. We talked about this yesterday. It has come on out that the Syrian air defense forces were not provided with the IFF codes. So their radar systems were not able to determine that the Ilyushin-20 was a friendly. Now, that was a big mistake, and obviously Russia and Syria are now more carefully integrating all of that information. And so that's one mistake. It comes under the heading of the fog of war. And friendly fire has been a problem in war for a very, very, very long time. Interestingly enough, there is now a new theory out. And apparently the Arabic language website of Russia Today quoted Russian military expert Mikhail Khodorovnikov as saying that it may have been possible that the French frigate Auvergne had played a role in the incident of the shoot down of the Ilyushin-20 because the French vessel fired cruise missiles at Syrian targets concurrent with the incident. And they're saying that, yeah, this complicated the situation. It panicked the Syrians, and they were just shooting at anything that was up in the sky, which is exactly how friendly fire incidents happen. But it is looking like it was a failure of the IFF. The Syrians did not have the code here. Israel's still saying, well, obviously that makes it Syria's fault. It's Assad's fault. It's Iran's fault. It's Hezbollah's fault. It's everybody's fault but ours. Russia is still taking the position that the Israeli aircraft shouldn't have been invading Syrian airspace at that point anyway. And therefore it was Israel's fault here. Now, as you know, Russia is starting to deploy the S-400 surface-to-air air defense missile. And India is going ahead with a purchase. They're saying it's an advanced stage. This risks more sanctions from the United States, which right now has gotten into the bad habit of sanctioning any country that dares buy Russian weapons and Russian ammunition and Russian warplanes. You know, you buy from America. And we may not be the best, but we are the most expensive, and therefore you will buy from us. But the concern is apparently that the radar that guides the S-400 is very sophisticated and may be able to penetrate the stealth capabilities of American fighter jets, and could not only identify radar tracks belonging to the F-35, but even determine the configuration of the aircraft in terms of what external ordnance or pods that it was carrying. And this is consistent with reports that have been coming along that the F-35 really is not as stealthy as everybody is being told that it is. And there is a little aspect about stealth that you need to keep in mind. And that is that all stealth aircraft and stealth ships are designed to be stealthy on the assumption that the radar emitter and the radar receiver are in the same location. And if you're dealing with a radar emitter on the ground and a radar receiver up in the sky, some distance away, the stealth capability starts to break down very, very rapidly here. Now, as you know, there was this big ISIS attempt at a breakthrough at Deir ez-Zor, and it kind of failed. And the Syrian forces are now back in control of Quneitra. And they've discovered a hospital used by the terrorists and equipped by Israel, the United States, and France. And the hospital was very well equipped, modern equipment, medication, X-ray systems, surgery section, a huge warehouse full of drugs. So it's one more indication. The Western powers have been backing ISIS and Al-Qaeda all along. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. So a lot of people are wondering, what's going on with Turkey? What is their strategy in Syria? And again, I want to go back to this theory that Claire actually came up with. And it may lie behind this deal that Turkey made with Russia about a demilitarized zone around Idlib, because we know that Turkey is showing every sign that they're not going to surrender Afrin, even though there are now massive protests in Afrin against the Turkish military province. And it may be that Turkey's ultimate goal is to annex Idlib, and that would make Aleppo a border town. So supposedly the deal that was made between Russia and Turkey calls for the clearing out of this deconfliction zone or demilitarized zone by October 15th. The problem with that is, of course, that the Al-Qaeda militants have rejected the deal completely. And in any event, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is saying, at best, it was an intermediate step. It was not a permanent solution. So, lost amid all of this talk about the Ilyushin 20 and Israeli F-16s and S-200, S-300 missiles, we need to remember that the threat of a false flag chemical weapons attack in Idlib is still very much present. Now, one of the groups inside Idlib, Jaish al-Izza, is saying they will go along with the de-escalation zone agreement reached by Turkey and Russia. And they also thanked Turkey for preventing a military operation by the Syrian army. But the situation is remaining very, very complicated. And we know the United States does not want to leave things as they are now. The United States wants Assad out. They want Syria under U.S. foreign puppet rule. They want Iran out. They want Russia out. And apparently there are a lot of war hawks in Washington, D.C. who are perfectly willing to go ahead with starting an outright war with Russia to just grab hold of Syria and keep pushing forward into the Middle East, into Iran, ultimately a confrontation with Russia itself. Over in Yemen, it has been revealed that the mercenaries that are leading the attack on Hodeidah were trained by the Israeli Defense Forces in Israel. And apparently they were being trained at secret IDF camps in the Negev desert. And they're leading this attack on Hodeidah, which observers are saying will dramatically worsen Yemen's already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Remember, aid groups are out there saying there are 5.2 million children on the verge of starving to death. Over in Israel, Jewish extremists continue to intensify their incursions into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Every time they go on in there, they're heavily escorted by Israeli forces, and they'll go on in there and they'll perform Jewish religious rituals, which of course is going to be a provocation to the Muslims. I mean, for those of you who are Christians out there, if you were basically worshiping at your church, how would you feel if Muslims came on in under heavy protection by military and started performing Muslim rituals in your sanctuaries? So you can see how provocative this is. So it's elevating tensions at the site. We're still hearing all this talk about how Israel has found a red heifer, and it's a sign that the third or fourth temple will be built, the Messiah will return, and so forth. All righty. Russian bombers are flying their scheduled Arctic Ocean flights. Two Russian Tupolev 160 strategic bombers were conducting scheduled flights over neutral waters of the Arctic Ocean. These were 14-hour flights, which included exercises in aerial refueling, and they were being shadowed by Typhoon and F-16 fighters of the Royal Air Force. So we're back to all those Cold War games. All right, let's take a phone call from Mona in Connecticut. Aloha, Mona. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. I'm concerned. I'm 27, pretty young, but I really am concerned about what's going on in this government. I don't understand why people are so adamant about their hatred towards Trump when it's so obvious and evident that Hillary Clinton, the whole Clinton administration, should be in jail. I really think there's some sort of blackmail going on. And
there's a lot of blackmail going on here.
Thank you.
There's a lot of blackmail going on. The reason that the Clintons are untouchable is they know where all the dead bodies are and how they got to be dead bodies. And, Hillary Clinton has basically been quoted as saying, if I go down, I'll take the whole U.S. government down with me. So that's why everybody works to protect.
But that's the thing is, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Rivero, but that is the thing. I thought about it quite a lot. Because I was a baby when Vincent Foster died, but when I started to read about that, that was very disturbing. It was who shoots themselves twice and then is dumped with a carpet around them in some sort of place that's so obviously murder. And it kills me because I have people who I went to college with, and they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to go to Washington D.C." And I'm like, why would you want to go there? That's not a place to be. That's going to destroy your entire moral integrity.
Well, there are people who are born without any moral integrity, and they seek to get into the political, the political realm, as it were. I mean, it's the curse of political power. It attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it.
Psychopaths? I suppose. I just, it's a little interesting, that's all. But your show is very wonderful and informative, and I just want to say I appreciate it. And I hope Claire's doing well. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Claire's doing better. She's obviously going to be with us in the third hour today, as normal. And, it's taking a while, and she's frustrated, but she is getting better. And so, Mona, thank you very much for the phone call. And I really appreciate the fact that younger people are really starting to pay attention to what's going on and waking up to just how incredibly corrupted the central federal government has become. Because that is what we're dealing with here. The reason that they're all going after Donald Trump is he's not part of the club. And the club are basically the corrupt.
You know what, Mike? I know you're letting me go, but that does bring up another question that I have.
Okay.
I understand that Donald Trump is not a part of the club, but he is completely surrounded, and he keeps putting in people around him who are a part of that upper echelon of control freaks. And I don't understand that. Like, is he that stupid?
Well, he's very weak,
understand his
and he
division.
proved that again today by backing off the demand to declassify the Russian investigation documents. And, you know, a lot of people could be forgiven for wondering why the liberals and the deep state are still after him so hard when he basically caves into them on every issue. But I think it may have to do with, as you said, they're control freaks. And they thought they had the 2016 election completely under control, and Hillary was going to be the president. And gosh darn it, those American people, you know, they didn't go along with the program, and they elected Donald Trump. And we have got to prove that we will decide who the leaders of this country are going to be, and not the American people. I mean, what do you think this is, a democracy? I mean, get real.
Isn't it what it says? A democracy is two wolves and a sheep, like deciding what's for dinner or something like that.
Yeah, and a pure democracy can lead to mobocracy, and that's actually a big part of what helped to bring Rome down. Technically, this country is supposed to be a republic with a democratically elected leadership. Unfortunately, we have lost that second part of the deal because our election system is totally compromised. And what really infuriates me about Donald Trump is that he's had a year and a half to deal with the problems with our election system and how crooked it is, and he really hasn't done anything. He dissolved his Election Integrity Commission. He's basically turned the issue over to the Department of Homeland Security, which, as far as we can tell, is part of the deep state. And, you know, they're running around saying we're going to make... I'm sorry?
It needs to be abolished because none of that. Like he like the headline the other day was just like Donald Trump says that the biggest mistake was going into the Afghan and Iraqi war, and like basically just invading the Middle East. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, he has no concept of foreign policy or history. He's good at when it comes to economics. However, he's not good when it comes to foreign policy because he does not understand exactly what is happening. I don't think he has a full grasp on it, and I don't think he's surrounded by people who are going to help him. They have their own agenda, military-industrial complex, and they definitely want this war machine going forever.
Absolutely.
And I'm just so annoyed. I'm so annoyed because it's not fair to my generation at all.
You know, Trump, I mean, this is the military-industrial complex, and President Eisenhower, in his farewell address, warned us this was going to happen. And looking back...
Exactly, I watched that. And also General Smedley Butler.
Yes.
I also watched that, like his address, when he was just talking about that, like a apparent subterfuge that was going to happen, like, and it didn't happen, but thank goodness. That would have changed the entire world. But... like, I don't understand why we're supposed to be such a free country, and we talk about all this freedom. However, we don't understand we have to fight for it, but we shouldn't have to fight for it within our own country.
Well, you need to remember, Mona, you need to remember the very best slaves in the world are the ones who think they're free.
I don't know, man. All I know is I respect you, and I also love when Dustin calls in. He's my favorite. when you guys talk, it's awesome. So I'm going to leave it at that, Mike. Happy Friday, and send my love to Claire.
I certainly will. And like I said, she'll be in here in about a little over an hour and a half. All right, Mona, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And just now getting a breaking story here. Apparently, there is now a clash between the Syrian Arab Army and Turkish-backed rebels in East Aleppo. Now, this is up in that whole Idlib, Afrin area. And this may be the beginning of a move by Turkey to basically consolidate control over that whole region and extend its borders in. So, crazy times over there in Syria. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go back to the phone lines here, and we're going to start with Frank in London. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just listening to a report. I was listening to YouTube. I think it's a conservative station. But the so-called blue wave that's supposed to be coming in November, that doesn't seem quite as a sure thing as they think. Apparently, I've just learned that, I don't know what you call it in America, but a guy won a seat in a constituent, if you like, in Texas.
Yes.
And that seat has been, for over 100 years, it hasn't been a Republican seat. So this blue wave, it doesn't seem like it's going to be quite as straightforward as, the mainstream media would have it. So
well, I think
that's
if we had absolutely honest, verifiable elections, I don't think there'd be a blue wave at all. But, as we documented the other day, Democratic leaders are literally encouraging Democrats to cheat at the polls. Vote early and often, whatever you can get away with. And we know the Democrats are lining up the illegal immigrants. They're registering them to vote and telling them to vote Democratic, which is outright illegal under our laws. Illegal immigrants, undocumented people who are not U.S. citizens or legal residents are not allowed to vote in our elections. But we know millions of them voted in 2016, and they're getting ready to do it again this November. So I think the Democrats are talking about a blue wave to just sort of pre-sell the idea of a democratic revolution so that people don't say, what the heck happened? Was there vote fraud in this surprise upset Democratic landslide?
Yeah, I've realized that, and I'm not surprised. These people, they've got some very, very unsavory characters in their parties. It's almost beggars belief, but everything is coming to light about these people now. And secondly, I did not realize that Zionism is so deeply entrenched in America. I was just reading a book or something called Against Our Better Judgment, and it's quite revealing that you've had Zionist people through a conflict of interest, rather. People in the Supreme Court justice had Zionist people operating there, and it's really quite unethical. It's given me an eye opener anyway.
Well, there's no question our government has been subverted by Israel. And as I've mentioned many times before, when I was a kid and getting my hate the Soviet Union indoctrination in public school, they were always exhorting us, beware of communist subversion. The commies are subverting our government to their purposes. And in hindsight, our government was being subverted. We were being told to look in the wrong direction.
Oh, yes. And those propaganda movies are coming back. The other day I went to see a movie, and they've got some sort of a war movie coming out where it's about the big bad Russians again. Also, look out for that one. Can't remember the name of it, but I saw a sneak preview of it.
Yeah,
so,
we're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, the Russian bashing has hit the flood stage, so get out the hip waders.
Okay, Mike, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Robert, who is also calling from London. And aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yes. Sorry to bother you. First of all, I'd like to make a point. I don't know very much at all, so I'm not the guy who knows it all. I know the sky is blue and the clouds are white and my fingernails are not clean. But I do believe in Bible prophecy, and according to my belief, Europe is in big trouble if it causes trouble. And according to another YouTube that I was watching earlier on before your show, the world has just missed a massive, huge bullet. Whereby the theory is, whether it's true or not, I have no idea. That the downing of the Russian aeroplane, right? The French ship apparently fired a missile. It never said what it hit, and the suggestion is that it hit the aeroplane, which was downed by the French apparently. But and that that Putin knows this, apparently, and that if he fires back at the French ship, then according to the NATO doctrine, any member of NATO, all that gets hurt, all nations of NATO can then respond. So the threat is that if Putin said, right, how dare you take this, then he's got the whole of NATO on his back, right? Apparently, theory.
Yeah, well, he wants to avoid that, obviously.
Absolutely. So the thing is, they did it, so Syria did it instead. Oh, what a huge mistake that was.
That's very, very plausible. That's very plausible. Robert, listen, I like your theory. I need to let you go, though, because we got to take another break for commercials, so we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the Syrian Arab News Agency has released video of the white helmets staging a chemical weapons attack in order to frame the Syrian government and say, oh my goodness, they're using chemical weapons. And contrary to the expectation that this next false flag attack was going to be really a hard sell, it's got the same problems as every other one of these fake videos. Supposedly these victims are dead, yet you can see them moving. They're supposedly contaminated with chemical weapons, and yet the people picking them up and loading them into this ambulance, no protective clothing, not even rubber gloves. They're handling these people with their bare hands. So apparently this video was put up on YouTube, and immediately YouTube took it down for violation of terms of service. But apparently it is being posted to YouTube so much, YouTube finally just threw up their hands in despair. And you can see it, and it's now on the front of whatreallyhappened.com. We all knew this was coming. They've been telegraphing this for a very, very long time. Over in Lebanon, Hezbollah's leader has announced that Hezbollah is now in possession of precision rockets, meaning rockets that are very, very accurate on hitting their targets. And basically this is a warning to Israel, saying do not wage another attack into Lebanon, because every once in a while Israel likes to go into Lebanon. They want that Litani River. They want all of that water. They got really frustratingly close the last time. I think they got within 21 miles of it. And so Hezbollah is now saying that they have the ability to strike very important targets inside Israel if Israel dares invade again. And of course, that's the reason for having long-range accurate missiles, or for that matter, nuclear weapons, to tell the other guys, leave us alone. Stay on your side of the border. Just leave us alone and everything will be fine. Now, as you know, one of the big propaganda stories that has been circulating this last week is how Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror, which, when you consider how much funding the United States has been pouring onto ISIS and Al-Qaeda, is a bit of a joke. It really is. But apparently a former official of MEK is saying that actually this main Iranian terror group is being funded by Saudi Arabia. And apparently Saudi intelligence funds the group by smuggling valuables like gold and Rolex watches into Iraq and Jordan to be sold on the black market to raise money for this so-called Iranian terror group. I don't know why they're bothering with Rolexes. iWatches are outselling Rolexes right now. All Rolexes do is tell the time. China's British envoy is out there responding to all of the incursions around the South China Sea under the rubric of freedom of navigation by saying that freedom of navigation isn't a freedom to invade and infringe upon sovereignty, and that China cherishes the freedom of navigation principles but will not remain idle as Western powers use it as a pretext to show off their military might and create trouble in the South China Sea. And the Chinese ambassador said some big countries outside the region did not seem to appreciate the peace and tranquility in the South China Sea. They sent warships and aircraft all the way to the South China Sea to create trouble. And he's making a valid point. Look on a globe at where this all is. This is well away from Great Britain or the United States. It is the South China Sea. And in World War II, Japan basically conquered those islands. And at the end of World War II, an agreement was reached called the Cairo Convention, in which all of the victorious allies of World War II, including the United States, agreed those islands would go back to the possession of China. But treaty, schmeedy, we want those islands now. There's oil and gas and stuff we want. Apparently, Trump administration hardliners are opposing the idea of peace on the Korean Peninsula. They're looking at all of these agreements between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in and the top military commanders of both Koreas, and the alarm bells are going off. The two Koreas have effectively, for all practical purposes, ended the Korean War. They're standing down their forces. They're pulling back from the DMZ. They're basically backing off of all of this, sneering at each other and making stink face across the DMZ. They're opening up the rail and road lines. They're moving ahead with this. And the U.S. Is in a bit of a panic. How are they going to stop this? Probably with another false flag. Like when they sank the Cheosin, a South Korean cruiser, and tried to frame North Korea for it, which fell apart when the remains of the torpedo they claimed they found under the Cheosin didn't actually match the blueprints of the standard North Korean torpedo. In fact, they matched a German torpedo that's manufactured exclusively for export. There's a lot of lying and false flag going on out there. All right, let's talk about the domestic politics right now. This Kavanaugh thing has just turned into a circus. We need clowns. We need clowns and jugglers and acrobats just to set the stage for this whole thing. Donald Trump has finally waded on into this and basically said, okay, if there was an attempted rape or a rape, where is the police report about this? And Trump is saying that if the attack on Christine Ford was as bad as she said, where she feared for her life, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement, either by her or her loving parents. Now, Christine Ford is out there saying she didn't tell her parents because she didn't want them to know that she had been drinking. But Trump does raise a point. When you go through a traumatic event where you are in fear for your life, it just locks into your memory, and you remember every little detail about it. And yet Christine Ford says she can't remember who drove her to the party, where the party was, who the host of the party was, how much she'd had to drink. The only thing she remembers is she got assaulted, and she's, gosh darn sure it was Kavanaugh. Now, as far as Christine Ford's testimony, the Senate Judiciary Committee is back to insisting she shows up Monday or it's no deal. Yesterday, Christine Ford, through her lawyer, had come on out and said, well, I'm willing to testify, not on Monday, later in the week, delay, as long as certain conditions are met that will make the hearing safe for me and fair. And basically, it's gone back and forth. Ford said she would testify, then she took it back. Now she's saying she'll testify, but the preconditions are kind of a little bit out there. Some of them are reasonable, but the non-starters are. She wants that Kavanaugh can't be in the same room when she testifies. She wants him blocked out of the room, and she wants Kavanaugh to testify first and not be allowed to testify after she's done, so that he cannot respond to anything that she says. And the Senate Judiciary Committee, to their credit, said, no, that's utterly ridiculous. You know, there has to be a right of cross-examination and the right for Kavanaugh to face his accuser. Now, as you know, one of the things that got a lot of people wondering about what was going on with Christine Ford is that about the same time that she came on, or the accusation was made public against Kavanaugh, Christine Ford erased all of her social media history, but she was a little slow getting there. And it got copied off, and it's out there on the internet. And back on March 17th of 2017, Christine Ford posted on Facebook, someone needs to come forward and accuse Neil Gorsuch of rape to derail his Supreme Court nomination. So this shows you what's really, really going on. Now, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is leading the charge against Kavanaugh, and out there saying, we have to believe Christine Ford. There's no question that she's telling the truth. You need to remember, Gillibrand also led the charge against a University of Virginia fraternity accused of rape by the Rolling Stone. That entire story turned out to be a complete hoax, and Rolling Stone had to pay the fraternity $1.65 million for the discredited rape accusation. So Gillibrand does not have a good track record for accuracy or honesty. Let's take a phone call from Don in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, can you hear me? Okay.
I hear you just fine.
Ford, the Professor Ford, I guess she's a professor at Palo Alto University. But her story has changed a lot too. Plus, the only really bad thing about it, as I get it, I mean, we haven't actually seen exactly the words she said, but what I've heard from, I guess it's secondhand and stuff. She said that the guy, whoever this guy was, tried to take her clothes off. Well, he didn't succeed. So, I mean, if he tried to take her clothes off and then she shrugged him off or something, then is that sexual assault? No, it's not really. He tried because he thought she was in a bathing suit, drunk at this party, and she probably wanted to, maybe. And then, so if he backed out, if he didn't actually assault, that's not sexual assault, trying to take somebody's clothes off if you think they want to, and then you back off. Because if he wanted to, if it was rape, he would have taken her clothes off, especially if there were 2 or 3 guys in there. They would have teamed up.
Well, there was only one other guy in there, and by the way, he's already said it just didn't happen. And if you think about it from a purely mechanical point of view, Christine Ford said that her attacker was lying on top of her while trying to take her clothes off. It's very hard to take somebody's clothes off when you're lying on top of them. And so that part of the story doesn't pass muster. But again, had it really been this traumatic incident where she's saying that her attacker cupped his hand over her mouth and she thought she was going to die, that would have locked the incident in her memory. There would be no fuzziness about it. But you can't remember anything about it, when it happened, where it happened, who was there, and again, the story has in fact changed. Because the version she told her therapist back in, I think it was 2014, she said there were 4 guys in the room and that there were other girls present. And again, the yearbook from her high school has surfaced and shows she was a wild child. She was a party girl. And you're absolutely right. It could have just been a simple misunderstanding where, high school girls will flirt with a guy. And then it goes too far, and then they shut it down. In fact, we had a name for it in high school. Girls who like to get guys excited and then turn them down. It was called being a cock tease.
Yeah, well, not only that, but, that's one possibility. Probably more probable is she's a liberal. Obviously, she's part of the liberal cause. She's friends with these big-time liberals like her lawyer, and she just made the whole thing up. That's probably what happened. But and then she said that she was afraid he would kill her. Well, what does that mean? You can be afraid. I can make that statement right now. I'm afraid Mike Rivero will come to Iowa and hunt me down and kill me, So, that makes you a terrorist. That makes you some suspects in that. So I mean, this thing is going to actually, in the long run, this will actually hurt the Democrats. I think in this election.
They do seem to have flubbed it, but it doesn't look like they're getting ready to give up on this whole thing. Now, because of the therapist notes from 2014, I think some kind of an incident probably did happen. But again, in the therapist notes, Kavanaugh is not mentioned by name. So it may have just been that Christine Ford said, well, I had, I was at a party where Kavanaugh was. I got assaulted. I'll just say that he was the one who assaulted me, and we'll have an ironclad case to get him blocked from the Supreme Court. But this revelation of her Facebook post in which she's saying somebody needs to come up with a rape accusation to derail Neil Gorsuch shows this is a tactic. This is a tactic that they're thinking about using.
Right. It's quite obvious that the American people are not stupid. They can see this. They pay any attention to it at all. They're not going to believe Mika and Joe and all these people like that. They're going to say, well, what the heck, I mean,
well, I wish it was up to the American people. Unfortunately, it's going to be up to the Senate, and we don't know who's being pressured, who's being blackmailed, who's being bribed. It really is a very...
I meant in the next election, they're going to look back at this, and I think this is going to hurt the Democrats, because most people are not on board with their whole agenda at all. I mean, and they've been going downhill, and this is going to hurt them. I really think that this is going to hurt them, and the Republicans will probably keep the House. Okay, I'll let you go, Mike. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and I hope you're right. But again, my concern is that having tried to steal the 2016 election and failed, the liberals are just going to be trying twice as hard in November. And if the GOP and Trump don't do anything to stop it, they're going to lose the Congress, and Trump is going to be a single-term president. Okay, apparently last Monday, Senate staff interviewed Judge Kavanaugh under oath, and Democratic staff were invited and told they could have asked any question of Kavanaugh. They didn't bother to show up. They're not interested in the facts. They're just interested in the smear job. Now, do you remember this classmate of Christine Ford, just a couple of years ahead in the same high school, came on out and said that she remembered hearing about Kavanaugh assaulting Christine Ford, and she wrote that to Facebook. Then she deleted it and backed off. And apparently she was contacted by a lot of media saying, can you substantiate the allegation? And now she's backed off completely and saying, well, actually, I have absolutely no specifics about that. So that has now gone away. And basically, she told NPR she would refuse to go before the Senate Judiciary Committee if they bothered to ask her, and I don't think they're going to bother at this point. We got to take a break here for commercials. We got people waiting on the phone when we get back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to the phones here, another interesting story. Senator Kamala Harris, Democrat of California, who's going to be one of the lead questioners if, in fact, Christine Ford does testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, along with Kavanaugh, is literally out there saying that the reasonable doubt standard does not apply to Kavanaugh, and that Christine Ford's sex assault charge does not need to be proven. To heck with the Constitution and the rule of law and due process. She said he did it. That's good enough for me. And we're seeing the Democrats literally take a meat axe to everything this country is supposed to stand for. All of our founding principles in their lust to get this guy, to heck with proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't need no proof. We have belief. We have right on our side. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You just made me sick to my stomach, Kamala Harris. Mike, also the Hawaiian woman you mentioned the other day. Oh, God, what a wretched piece of garbage. I'm sorry you're stuck on the island with her.
Well, the good thing for me is she's usually in Washington, D.C.
I mean, what kind of these? You know what, Mike? These people are all full of crap, though.
They are.
This is all political because Mike. You realize if Kavanaugh wasn't, this wouldn't even come up. So then we're like, then it goes back to why didn't she tell the police 36, 38, 40, 50 years ago? It's all political. It's obvious. It's the same with Roy Moore.
Why didn't Dianne Feinstein make this public in July when she supposedly got this letter, which, by the way, she is still refusing to share the complete unredacted letter with the Senate Judiciary Committee? Just look at the accusation. That's it. That's all you need to know. Just believe, as we tell you to believe.
And Mike, remember during Trump, that woman on the airplane, he touched me and this or that, and that was like 30-something years later. Too. It's all the same. See, these people are following the same playbook because they got no other playbooks to play. You know what I mean? It's the same stale playbook. And you know what kills it? If they keep doing the same thing. And, Einstein keep doing the same thing expecting a different result.
Yep.
You're not going to get a different result. I mean, it blows my mind how they can just keep doing this. Because they have nothing to offer.
They have nothing else to go with. They have nothing else to go with. I mean, the GOP controls the Senate. Kavanaugh's confirmation is a done deal unless they can create a big enough stink where some of the moderate GOP senators might flip over and vote against the confirmation. But over the last several days, we've seen these GOP senators who were sort of waffling on the issue. They're starting to drift on back to confirmation. And we're seeing the Democrats panicking. And I hope the American people are watching this because were we to have honest elections, that previous caller is correct. This is definitely going to work against the Democrats in November. Nobody wants a bunch of crybabies running this country.
Hey, Mike, can you hold me over?
Yeah, I'm going to hold you over here. So we're going to
okay.
Yeah, we're going to hold you over, and we'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, just take it away.
Mike, you know what? This is about not the Supreme Court this is about control and power. That's what it comes down to. These people don't care about abortion. It's just an issue they use for control.
Yes.
They don't care about the children. They don't care about the troops. They only care about it when they get votes and they control what they want. That's it. And it's just sad how this is. Yeah, Mike. Like you said, we're at that point. Like this is what we got left. We have nothing left in this country. It's just It's falling apart. It's rotted. It's a decadent country. You got half the people in this country don't like the country. The other half, they love the country. But you know what, Mike? There's still a percentage of the country that just don't know what's going on. And we have to reach them. We have to reach them. We have to start using postal mail or electronic mail or text messages or face-to-face. Our responsibility as those who know the truth is to reach out to those who are still swallowing the blue pill from the corporate media and say, look, you've got to wake up and really take a look at what's going on. In fact, I just got a very interesting email from somebody who said, it's really disgusting that Americans care more about who the politicians screwed 30 years ago, and they're not paying attention to the fact that we're all being screwed every single day by the politicians. Yep. They outsourced our jobs. They bailed out Wall Street and the banks. They started all these phony wars. And what did they give us back? Nothing but lies. It's all lies. Everything's a lie.
Yes.
The Syrian war is a lie. All this is a lie. Hey, Mike, on that woman who called in, Mona, I believe her name was?
Yes.
She should go on YouTube and look up an oligarchy. Just do some research. That's what we are.
Yes.
We used to be a constitutional republic with democracy for election process, which Hillary Clinton, cheating on Bernie Sanders, throws that out the window. And who knows how far before her it's been thrown out the window. But we are an oligarchy now, where a small group of people control the vast amount of stuff, including the media. And if you control the message, if you control the media, you control the message.
Well,
we're in a dangerous time.
That used to be true, but that's not true anymore in the age of the independent media, which is why we're under attack now.
Exactly, yeah. That's why I just read PayPal is going to nix Alex Jones now in InfoWars. So it's continuing. Hey, Mike, on what made me laugh is, you talked about this before. The U.S. government's going to sanction China for buying Russian military weapons like the Su-35 fighter and the S-400. Like, whose business of ours or anybody else in the world, who buys what from who?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is threatening to do that to Turkey as well, and that's the new thing. Sanctions have become the new club. The U.S. government is acting like a caveman, saying, ugh, buy our weapons or we'll club you. And it's definitely turning the world against us.
Welfare in a warfare state, Mike. And remember, there was somebody in the ambassadors? Remember, they were told to go out and sell weapons. Remember?
Yes.
Not too long ago. Go out and it's like basically they're just salesmen for the military-industrial complex. Oh yeah, Mike, this is going to end well for the world. I mean, and China will just start dumping some treasuries, not all at once, but they're moving away. They're moving away, dumping treasury. It's going to be a small amount at a time. They're not going to dump everything at once to disturb the markets. But, things are changing. It's just a slow process, But that's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And we're going to switch over to Russell in Austin. Aloha, Russell. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks. Just want to raise a few points. As you said, Senator Feinstein has not agreed to release the full unredacted letter. That's another aspect of not being able to face your accuser. That should be. I can't see why Grassley can't get that. But let's see. Second thing is, she said that he had a classmate that's virtually identical to him. She described the house being very close to. Okay, I don't want to steal your thunder on that. See, next thing is, Grassley, as of today, seems to be leaning to requiring Ford to testify on Monday, which would be good, and not let it delay. McCaskill said that she won't support Kavanaugh, and she's in a very tight race in Missouri, so this could cost several Democrats their jobs. And the good news is that McConnell said today that we will push it through, so he may know something about how these waffling people are going to vote.
Yeah, this has gone on way too long, and it has degenerated into a complete circus. And for those Americans paying attention to this, and it is getting a lot of coverage. The corporate media is covering this. They're putting their liberal spin and bias on it, but they are covering it because they don't want to cover what's going on in Syria right now. It is making the Democrats look bad, and it's reinforcing the stereotype of the liberal Democrats as basically screaming crybabies going all the way back to the 2016 election. And I hope it will have an impact on the November elections, because I don't want this country run by a bunch of screaming crybabies who want what they want and will do anything to get it. And they're willing to ignore due process. They're willing to ignore the right to a presumption of innocence. This senator just came on out and said, a woman's accusation, that's all we need.
Pat Buchanan said that he wrote something about how we ought to find a way to peacefully separate. And I think we're heading in that direction, because I can't imagine the Democrats having complete control of the government again. It would be like a totalitarian government.
The entire country would be like California.
Yeah. One thing.
Only minus Disneyland.
It's surprising. Yeah. That thing in Syria, I mean, that was like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so close. If the Russians had fired back, who knows what might have happened. That's scary.
It is, but and anyway. I'm thinking very hard about that theory that the Ilyushin 20 may have actually been shot down by the French frigate, and Putin decided that he was going to say it was an accident by the Syrians in order to not let the situation escalate, which is only a temporary stopgap because there will be another provocation.
You know, they said that the Russians said that there's a no-fly zone for a few weeks while they're doing an exercise. I think what they're doing is they're moving in the S-300s and maybe S-400s to make it a permanent no-fly zone over Syria. And I think it would be a great idea.
The no-fly zone is actually over the eastern Mediterranean, but Syria would be well within its rights to say there is a no-fly zone over our country, and only nations we approve of, like Iran and Russia, are allowed to fly into our airspace, and everybody else is going to get shot down. We'd be well within his rights to do that.
If they had the capability of doing it, which they probably don't right now, but they're getting there.
I would imagine right about now that Russia is sending a whole fleet of cargo airplanes to Syria right now with much more advanced weaponry and missiles.
Yeah, I think so. It'd be great if they could pacify that area and put a stop to this. Because I've heard the Chinese Navy is sending assets to be off Syria, and it's crazy. I mean, my gosh. But that's all I've got. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and there's a lot of naval assets in the eastern Mediterranean. One wrong move, and we're going to be in the biggest battle since Jutland. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, as you know, a woman who's a curator at a museum in Mexico who went to the same high school as Christine Ford has now backed off, saying that she knew that Kavanaugh had attacked Christine Ford. She's now saying, well, it was just a rumor, it was a buzz, no specifics, and I can't back it up, and she's now basically trying to disappear. But another woman who went to that same school as Christine Ford has come on out, and it's Virginia Hume, who's the daughter of Fox News' Britt Hume, and she's saying she knew Kavanaugh then, and has nothing bad to say about him. And so far, she's one of over 60 women to basically come on out and say that they knew Kavanaugh back then, and he didn't behave like that. Now, if somebody is a sexual predator, they're going to be a predator all the time. Look at Bill Clinton. They're not just a predator once, and then the rest of the time, they're a gentleman. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, as that last caller mentioned, there's a new theory that has come on out, and it basically has to do with another student at the same school as Kavanaugh, Chris Garrett. And if you look at their yearbook photos, they are virtually identical. They look very, very much alike. And even more interesting is the house that Chris Garrett was growing up in when he was in high school with his parents matches the description of the house given by Christine Ford. So it's entirely possible, and we don't want to, tar and feather Chris Garrett, but there may have been a confusion of identity, and that's all it takes to create reasonable doubt. Now, I know the Democrats don't want reasonable doubt. They don't want a presumption of innocence. They want Kavanaugh out of there, and will do anything to get it. I'm glad that Grassley has decided to say Monday is it. It's either Monday or we're going forward with the vote for confirmation, because the Democrats are dropping hints that they have found another accuser of Kavanaugh. The Democrats are out there saying, okay, yeah, Christine Ford, her story's not, well, we believe her, but there's no proof here, but, and she looks really silly, and we look really silly for backing her, but we've got another one. We've got another one in the pipeline. We've got another accuser, and if that doesn't work, we'll find another one after that. Dianne Feinstein was out there on Twitter basically chastising anybody who doesn't believe Christine Ford's story, just at face value. And she tweeted out, "We're better than this," at which point Juanita Broderick fired on back, saying, "No, you're not. Now we're back in 1999 when you refused to read my deposition for the independent counsel along with all Democrats. Your vote had already been decided before testimony. Shame on you. And this, of course, gets on back to Juanita Broderick's accusation that Bill Clinton raped her and then told her to put some ice on that here. CNN interviewed a group of women in Florida for a segment that aired last night about whether they believe Kavanaugh's denial. And the host asked for a show of hands. How many of you believe Kavanaugh when he says it didn't happen? All the women raised their hands. All right, let's take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I think we've reached a place, an unfortunate place in time where the mere accusation, the Me Too movement, and some other things as well, like saying the N-word or criticizing Israel, just the mere an allegation of such is enough to ruin a man's career.
Yes.
No evidence is needed, no charges filed, no nothing, you know?
Well, there's nothing new about that. I mean, that got started back in the 1990s when with the militant male bash feminism, where they ginned up. There was a rape crisis, and all women were victims and all men were rapists, and they whipped up this huge hysteria. And because of the media attention that was available, a lot of women came up with these fantastic stories. There was one case where a woman literally wrapped herself in duct tape in the stall of a men's room and claimed she was raped. There was a very famous incident in Davis, California, where a woman claimed she'd been gang raped by skateboarding teenagers on the median of this divided road that went through the middle of town. And a lot of innocent guys got sent to jail. They were trying to get on out. They kept demanding DNA tests. And believe it or not, the National Organization for Women actually came on out and said, no, you can't do DNA tests. It implies that women would lie about this sort of thing. And it got really, really out of control. And the end result was that real rape victims were not being listened to after it was all over and done. Police departments and social services that had been sued by wrongfully prosecuted and slandered men, they became really, really skeptical. But it generated a lot of money and political power for the leaders of that feminist movement. And by the way, if you're interested in the history of 90s feminism, there's a book that you should look at, and it's written by a lady called Christine Hobbs Summers, who describes herself as a feminist, and the book is titled Who Stole Feminism? And it's actually a very good book because it describes how the original equity feminist movement, which we could all get behind, equal pay for equal work, equal access to education, equal access to credit, who could argue with that? And when it was still equity feminism, I was a big supporter. And then it got hijacked by these political opportunists who transformed it into this male bash, rape hysteria. And what was really ironic is instead of teaching women to stand up and be the equal to men, it taught them to go back to being afraid and timid and just jumping at their own shadows. But again, it made a lot of money. So the book, again, is Who Stole Feminism? It's Christine Hobbs Summers. It is a very, very good read.
Well, even then, Mike, I think the bar has moved like tremendously. I mean, look at all the Bill Clinton allegations, right? That, of course, nothing stuck to that guy. The women's movement itself overlooked that even in the 90s.
Yes.
So it depends on who says it. And then remember Tawana Brawley? You remember her?
Yeah, that one that wrecked a lot of careers. That one was really ugly.
And those guys' careers stayed wrecked, but nothing ever happened to Tawana Brawley or Al Sharpton. It depends on who you are, and it's incredible how if you say just the wrong thing, for instance, if you say the N-word, your career is ruined, unless of course you're a black guy and you can say it all day long.
Yes.
Or if you're a feminist, you can rape people. Or who's a senator, the guy that's a Saturday Night Live guy from Minnesota that got resigned. Al, what's his name again?
Franken.
Yeah, Al Franken, the Me Too guys got him too, but he's coming back, and they're going to allow him to come back. It's just, it depends on who you are, and it's ridiculous. But the fact of the matter is, and Paul Craig Roberts said the other day about something else, apparently in Western civilization, evidence doesn't mean a jack crap anymore. It just doesn't mean anything. It's the accusation, it's the echo chamber in the press, and all the political agendas that are being served.
Yes.
And, woe be to us. And I keep thinking in all this stuff, there's a Hall of Fame football coach who he fired an assistant coach, and it came out that in 2015, this just happened. 2015, this assistant coach that worked for this Hall of Fame coach had an allegation of spousal abuse. There was never a charge, by the way. Police weren't charged. Nobody got charged. Even the woman's mother said she was lying. And the Hall of Fame coach fired this guy. Of course, he had nothing to do with it. It happened 3 years beforehand, and it had nothing to do with the school, and there were no charges. But he got suspended for 3 games, cost him $500,000, and there's nothing there.
Yeah, it is out of control. It's guilt by accusation. And, they're throwing away these cherished principles of our system, which is due process, presumption of innocence, and the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt before we exact punishment on anybody. But we're seeing Democrats saying, no. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. We're going to go back to the telephones here to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Happy Friday. I got to tell you, this whole Kavanaugh thing, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, but this really focuses and kind of throws into light everything that's really the right people have been talking about that's going on. The inability to reason with Democrats and the left is something that some of us have been saying for a while now. Their hysterics, the women being thrown out of the hearing because they're screaming, and now this made-up baloney, which is such a farce on its face. I mean, today the lady's saying she doesn't want to fly now, so she wants to drive to Washington. I mean, it's such a farce, but in a way, it's kind of scary in that it tells you that there's really no reasoning with these people. The only way to really deal with them is either lock them up in an insane asylum or ignore them. And Chuck Grassley let this get out of his control right from the start when he let the farce continue with the screaming and the hysterics. Today or yesterday, they all showed up at his office and were eating sandwiches. I mean, what kind of a senator would allow that? I mean, and if any right people from the right try to stunt like that, we'd get locked up so fast and a good beating for good measure. So as a right winger, I just want to stress the fact to other right wingers that are listening to this: you can't reason with these people. You have to defeat them. They have to be beaten, and I don't mean physically, but beaten to the point where they no longer have any power. Look at how they're exercising their power. They are abusing it. It's totally unconstitutional what they're doing. And I hope after Kavanaugh is put on the Supreme Court, and who's not a person I really particularly like, but he deserves to be put on the court for his, he is a good intellect. I hope he sues the hell out of this lady. She has every right to sue her for defamation. She's obviously, she's deleted all her Facebook posts. She's obviously, and you were bringing up that one about her saying that with Judge Gorsuch, somebody should claim that he raped her. How's she going to defend that in court?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right here. But the reason liberalism has sunk to this state is they've run out of real ideas. And when I was a kid, I remember when the Republicans were the party of the rich and the party of war, And the Democrats were the party of the people and peace. And now today, the two parties are indistinguishable. They both serve the ultra wealthy. They're both in favor of war. And so the Democrats are desperate for something that they can offer the American people to win their votes. And there's just nothing that they have other than screaming and crying and, saying that if you don't vote for us, you're a racist, misogynist, transphobic, whatever the latest insults are going to be. You're right. They're not interested in a rational discussion. They just know what they believe. They believe in the one world government. They believe Hillary should have been president. They believe in human-caused global warming, and they believe that anybody who doesn't agree with them ought to be censored and shut up.
Well, it's a shame because the Democrats at one time were the party for the working man and unions. And they did work for the betterment of the middle class. And then they sold out, during the Clinton administration to the oligarchy and globalism. I mean, imagine when the Democrats were saying they were going to destroy the coal industry and put all those coal miners out of business. I remember I was part of a union back when they passed NAFTA, and I was infuriated, and yet my union still supported Bill Clinton in '96. And I was all for Pat Buchanan. I said, we got to go for Pat Buchanan in '92. And it's just, it's so sad. And I'm hoping that Trump's populism, at least the working man and the middle class, can get a voice at least in the Republican Party. And maybe the Democrats, some of them will get back to their senses and walk away from this divisive leftism. It's really destroying the Democratic Party.
I'll tell you where that all came about from is when they started removing campaign donation limits, especially that ridiculous Citizens United decision. Because before that, where the rich could only donate so much, the Democrats had to go out and fundraise among the regular American people. And that's what made them subordinate to the will of the American people. Same thing to a lesser extent with the Republicans, although they were pandering to as many of the rich as they could get to. But once the campaign donation limits came off, control of the political parties fell into the hands of just a very few powerful billionaires and corporations like Sheldon Adelson. And so the Democrats gave up any idea of appealing to the American people other than during election years, and they went scrambling after the big donations just as much as anybody else. Look at Hillary Clinton's campaign donations record from 2016. She made only a token effort to fundraise at the grassroots level. She just went right to the Wall Street corporations and all those big donors, and they just poured the money right onto her, knowing that had she won the presidency, she would be basically pandering to their best interests, their profit. Anyway, listen, Joe, thanks an awful lot. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, the New York Times has come out with a story basically saying that Rod Rosenstein proposed wearing a wire, a microphone, to secretly record President Donald Trump in order to try and grab information that could be used to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. And the story is saying that Rosenstein considered taping Trump in the White House in the aftermath of Trump's decision to fire FBI Director James Comey in May of 2017. And Rosenstein reportedly proposed these steps because he was alarmed by the chaos consuming the presidency in the early days that followed Comey's firing. Rosenstein broadly denied the allegations and attributed them to anonymous sources who are clearly biased against the Department of Justice, only to have the Washington Post come on out and say, actually, this story is confirmed in McCabe's memos. So it's just amazing here. Over in California, Governor Moonbeam basically came out with what seems like a veiled threat to Donald Trump. And Brown is unhappy with Trump over his stance on climate change. And he came on out and said, something's got to happen to this guy. Brown said, we never had a president who was engaged in this kind of behavior. And he's sabotaging the world order in many respects. And that's the real issue. Trump doesn't want to go along with the globalism. Brown said Trump will undermine the world. So I think there's the real agenda. As you know, Robert Mueller put a lot of pressure on Michael Cohen. And now that Cohen is cooperating, it's starting to become very obvious Cohen doesn't actually have anything that Mueller's going to be able to use. They're grasping at straws. And Cohen has sat for hours worth of interviews with investigators from the special counsel's office, and he has not been able to provide them with anything that they want. They basically went down a dead trail here. Okay, in another indication that Donald Trump is proving to be a very weak president, he has backed off on his order to declassify all the Russian investigation messages and texts. And he's basically saying that he was contacted by not just the Department of Justice, but two unnamed allies. Two other foreign governments said, no, don't declassify this stuff. And so Trump is now saying that he's going to allow the Department of Justice Inspector General to decide what should be redacted or not. But in the end, if he has to, he can still order the declassification. But it's another indication he's a weak man. And what's really interesting is the Department of Justice argument to not declassify this information is it would have a perceived negative impact on Robert Mueller's Russiagate probe. Well, that's the whole point, to get it on out there that there are serious problems with that investigation. And I'm stunned that Donald Trump just backed off on this. I'm absolutely stunned. He may be a great reality TV star and a so-so real estate developer, but as a leader, I think the problem here is, Trump had a reputation back when he was a property developer that he wanted to be friends with everybody. Was very generous with workers, very kind, which is a good thing to be. But you need to understand when you're in management, you can either be a manager or you can be everybody's friend. You cannot be both. And the read I have here right now is Trump is trying to be friends and get along with everybody, and they're taking advantage of it. I think this probably is the second biggest mistake Trump has made after keeping the Obama holdovers. He had an absolute golden opportunity to expose the witch hunt for what it was, which would have had a bearing on the November elections, and he blew it. He absolutely blew it. What is wrong with that man? Is he taking prescription antidepressants? Now, former CIA director and MSNBC contributor John Brennan has called on FBI Director Christopher Wray, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to push back on any director from the White House that may have a negative impact on the Mueller investigation. Okay, well, this is coming from a corporate media TV hack because he's not currently director of the CIA. But Brennan came on out saying the FBI has an obligation to circumvent Trump because they all took a constitutional oath to the United States. Yeah, but they work for the president. So, again, Trump had a golden opportunity and he dropped the ball. He absolutely dropped the ball. Tom Fitton over at Judicial Watch is out there saying the left wants to keep information classified to make it harder for Trump to defend himself, and that is exactly what's going on. They want to keep those Russia investigation documents secret so that Trump can't look at them and say, hey, this is clearly entrapment, this was clearly a lie. Where is Trump getting his advice? Where was Rudy Giuliani in all of this? Did Rudy Giuliani, the man who said he was warned that Building 7 was going to collapse and then denied it afterwards, even though it was on TV, did he just throw his boss under the bus on this? I'm sorry. Trump is toast. We're only a couple of months away from the November elections. Trump has run out of time to actually try and change the political landscape to favor the GOP. I'm really annoyed at him. And as an American citizen, I have a First Amendment right to be annoyed with the President of the United States of America. So I'm going to wag my finger at him very seriously and energetically. Let's talk about the economic news. A lot of interesting things going on over there. Article out of Zero Hedge talking about how central planning failed in the old Soviet Union. And yes, it did. The central government couldn't react quickly enough to events that were happening far away. And it's a large country. And the lesson that came out of the collapse of the Soviet Union was that central planning really wasn't going to work, that local governments and jurisdictions had to have a certain degree of autonomy to deal with immediate changes in the reality on the ground. If you want to talk about the failure of central planning, go back and look at Lysenkoism. But unfortunately, central banks seem to be going back to that same model. They want to be centrally planning the entire U.S. economy. And that's not really going to work out that well. If for no other reason than the central bankers are going to run the economy to maximize their profit. Donald Trump is demanding that OPEC lower their oil prices. And it says the reason is because the United States protects the Middle East countries. Actually, right now, the United States seems to be invading Middle East countries. So, anyway, Trump is out there saying that OPEC countries will not be safe for long without the United States. Now, this was actually a part of the petrodollar deal. When Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility of the Federal Reserve note, trust in the U.S. dollar, international demand for the U.S. dollar collapsed. And so they launched the petrodollar deal, which is where the United States went to all these oil-producing nations and they said, here is the deal. You agree to sell your oil only for the U.S. dollar, and you agree to invest those dollars back in the United States. We will guarantee your military safety. And for a while, it worked. But unfortunately, ever since 9/11 especially, with Israel's renewed aggressions in the region, more and more countries in the Middle East are saying the United States can't keep their side of the bargain. And worse, as I mentioned before, the U.S. isn't protecting those oil countries in the Middle East, it's attacking them. It's invading them. Now, one of our callers yesterday mentioned this, and this is the confirmation. The Trump administration has persuaded Volkswagen to comply with the new sanctions on Iran and end almost all of its business in the country. And this is a symbolically charged step in undercutting European Union efforts to keep the 2015 nuclear deal alive. They're still trying to find some way to get Europe to go along with abandoning the deal, putting sanctions on Iran, and using the sanctions to get Iran to give up all of its weapons of deterrence so that when the U.S. invades Iran, they'll just be able to walk in and take over the place. That's the strategy. They've done it already. They did it with Saddam Hussein in Iraq. They did it in Syria, although Syria is still ongoing. The U.S. will go into a country, apply economic and political pressure, and say, give up your weapons of deterrence, and we promise we'll leave you alone. And the country will give up their weapons of deterrence, and the U.S. promptly invades. Now, there's an interesting little article that came out of the American Conservative saying that Washington's endless sanctions are starting to backfire. And they're saying the sanctions are worse than ineffective. They have far-reaching economic impacts. Limiting Iran's oil sales is going to push up energy prices globally. That's why Trump is out there threatening OPEC, lower prices, because you need us to protect you. And these economic penalties are always going to hurt those with the least power, influence, and money. which means the ordinary people of these countries. And we have seen these sanctions flash back like on Europe. That ill-considered oil price war with Russia actually caused more economic damage to Europe than it did to Russia. It was a kind of a shoot from the hip approach to foreign policy and economic policy here. Another article coming out of Global Research, the U.S. sanctions reach a turning point. De-dollarization and collusion against the United States. And it's pointing out that every year the U.S. finds a new country or group of countries to hit with sanctions. Each year the U.S. adds another 1,000 individuals to its ever longer sanctions list. And now these countries and individuals are starting to fight back. They're going to alternative currencies. India is going to buy Iranian oil, paying for it with the rupee. And the U.S. sanctions will have no effect on that, because the U.S. sanctions are only enforceable if you're working with the U.S. dollar and going through the electronic funds transfer system that's under U.S. control, SWIFT. If you're setting up your own trade, your own finance, if you're going through one of these new alternative electronic funds transfer systems, it pulls the teeth right out of the sanctions. Now, another article is coming on out. This is from shtfplan.com, saying basically the damage that we are seeing from the trade war is actually being used to obscure the failings of the central bank and its way of operating. Even before this whole tariff thing got going, we knew the central bank was causing a lot of economic damage to the country because by design it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And we have been seeing the effects of that with the mortgage-backed security meltdown, skyrocketing student loan debt, higher prices, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. But now as we continue to see that, the central bankers can say, oh, it's not us. It's not us. It's those tariffs. It's those evil Chinese and Russians. Blame them. Don't blame us. We're bankers. How can you not trust us? Okay. Ray Dalio over on Bloomberg is predicting a dollar crisis and saying history is due to repeat itself. And he's saying it will be not just a dollar crisis, it will be a political and social crisis. And I'm absolutely in agreement. I'm absolutely in agreement. Another warning sign right now is corporations are borrowing against their net worth as opposed to borrowing against cash flow and income, which is in effect what households were doing in 2004, 2005, and 2006, and we know what happened in 2008. Corporate debt in the U.S. is now higher than it's ever been. A lot of people get seduced by the earnings reports coming on out saying how incredibly wealthy these corporations are based on their earnings. But the reality is corporations are as mired in debt as most American households. And as the economy continues to tighten, corporations are going to be in trouble. I mean, look at how many retail franchises, chains, have shut down. Toys R Us, Babies R Us. Now they're predicting that Sears will have closed all of its stores in just a few more years. Meanwhile, over at Bayer, they have been forced to slash their earnings forecast over the development of all these Roundup lawsuits that are starting to pile on up regarding the product that they put on out that is a known carcinogen, known probable carcinogen here. Amazon is planning to open 3,000 cashierless Amazon Go stores by 2021. And basically you'll walk on in, you'll buy whatever you're going to buy, I presume out of some little kind of a shelf unit with a door on it. And as you walk on out, your card is scanned. And this is going to be a threat to convenience stores and fast food chains, because without having to pay for the cashiers, the items will be cheaper and faster. Now, I'm never going to use one of those, because I understand that if the American people do not have jobs, then they do not have money to put back into the economy at those shopping malls. Amazon could do this and discover nobody's coming in through the front door because nobody's got the money. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're still talking about the economy. Unfortunately, there is another indicator that the economy is not doing very well, and it's a phenomenon that is called the home ATM, by which Americans, just to get by, just to pay their bills, are having to dip into their home equity, which means they're living off the home equity. And we're not talking about retired people, reverse mortgages. We're talking about middle-aged Americans at the height of their supposed earning ability. And that's the stage in your life where you want to build up the equity in your home, because that's part of what you're going to retire on. But the economy is now so tight, so much is being spent on these wars, prices are so high and wages and salaries so low that Americans are literally living off the equity in their property. Now, the other day, Poland had suggested that Donald Trump could stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Hungary wants to reach all the way into Europe to bring Russian oil and gas to the European market, which would be an economic threat to America's liquefied natural gas producers. But Trump has decided he's not going to go along with that. He's not going to sanction the Nord Stream 2 companies. A lot of people are scratching their heads. But he did come on out and say that nobody should depend on just one energy source, which actually is very wise and prudent. So Trump's rationale is that the Russian gas going into Europe is a good thing, along with continued U.S. exports of liquefied natural gas. Okay, let's talk about immigration and refugees. There's an interesting statistic coming out of the latest Census Bureau data. Nearly half the population in the top 5 United States cities do not speak English at home. That's 67 million people living in this country who, while they're at home, don't speak English. They speak a foreign language. So George Soros' dream of just blending us all together is moving forward. Getting back to Hungary, their Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó has accused the United Nations Human Rights Watchdog of spreading lies about Hungary, saying that immigration is not a fundamental human right. And that's been a big talking point about the open borders people. They're declaring that it's a fundamental human right that you can just go anywhere in the world that you want to and nobody can stop you. I wish they were that dedicated about the First Amendment. But Hungary is saying, no, immigration is not a fundamental human right. It is a privilege. And those seeking to immigrate into Europe have to go through the usual checks. Health check, background check, make sure that they're going to be a benefit to the society rather than a burden. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification, and when we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who, as usual, every Friday in our third hour comes on in to share her unique perspective on the world. So, Lady Claire, what is your first story?
Well, I have to confess to being both annoyed and alarmed at this. Wasn't Donald Trump the guy during the campaign who said that America had to come first Do you remember that from any of his,
Oh,
take
I
care
remember
of?
it.
Yeah,
I mean,
you
they even
remember
had
it. Yeah.
hats on it,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and this you probably haven't seen a whole lot of because there was the U.S.'s equivalent of the British D-notice on this bill. It's two parts. The U.S. has now pledged $3.3 billion with a B in military aid to Israel, but has cut humanitarian aid to Palestinians completely. Now, this bill, as I said, is two parts, and that $3.3 billion will be delivered to Israel the next year. The figure is likely to increase by an additional $550 million as a result of Congress passing a $716 billion defense bill.
Well, you know what they say, $1 billion here, $1 billion there.
Yeah.
Soon you're talking some real money.
And the bill was passed under what was described in the article as a complete media blackout. At the same time, President Trump pulled humanitarian aid to the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which provides basic provisions for about 5 million Palestinian refugees. And now we have, this is the largest single military aid package in American history. And Mike, this comes out to 23,000. Let me repeat that number, folks, because it's mind-boggling. 23,000 for every Jewish family living in Israel. Now,
But those Jewish families won't get the money, of course. It's all going to go for, bombs and Iron Dome. What's really amazing to me is why Israel isn't self-funding its military. I mean, here you had the American taxpayer funded the development of the Iron Dome missile system, which Israel is now manufacturing and selling to other countries. Why do they need more of our money? The answer is they don't. They've got a very robust economy. They don't need our money. They just want it.
And
we want your money.
Oh, yeah.
We've got to have more of your money.
And you have to remember, Mike, just how powerful AIPAC is, which is the Israeli organization in the United States that pressures our representatives to pass bills that are favorable to Israel and not so favorable to people Israel doesn't like. Now, according to the next part of the bill, there is going to be a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. The person serving the post would serve as the primary advisor to and coordinate efforts across the U.S. government relating to monitoring and combating both anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incitement that occurs in foreign countries. Now, Mike, don't we have a head-on collision between the First Amendment and this bill?
Well, they're talking here in the case of foreign countries.
Yeah.
Where it's considered that they're not covered by the First Amendment. But we're seeing Trump basically trying to bring that here. The Department of Education is literally out there talking about prosecuting students who criticize the government of Israel or support the Palestinian cause. And you're right, that is a head-on collision with the First Amendment. But unfortunately, Israel is lobbying to carve out an Israel exception to the First Amendment. And of course, if they succeed in doing that,
all heck will break loose.
Yeah, there'll be other exceptions. There'll be a vaccine exception. You can't criticize vaccines, can't question the safety of GMOs, can't talk about politicians' bad deeds, and so forth and so on. That will be the end of the First Amendment here. By the way, a story we just put up on whatreallyhappened.com. 2 synagogues were vandalized with swastikas in Israel. Police have arrested the suspects who turned out to be Jewish kids.
Ouch.
Yep.
Ouch. Ouch. And the one thing I would like President Trump and Jared Kushner to understand, that financial and humanitarian punishment of the Palestinians is not going to induce them to relinquish their right of return. Now, Mike, am I correct in recollecting that this was set out by the Balfour Declarations?
No. This was set out by the United Nations. When Israel was accepted as a member of the United Nations, it came with 2 conditions. In fact, Israel is the only nation whose UN membership has conditions on it. And condition number 1 was a Palestinian right of return. And the second condition was that if the Palestinians of their own free will chose not to go back to their homes and villages taken from them during the creation of Israel, that Israel would financially compensate them for the properties. Israel has complied with neither of those conditions.
None of it.
And now, of course, you've got Donald Trump, fresh from moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem,
Right.
is now openly out there saying, no, there's no Palestinian right of return. They should, be happy being jammed into Gaza. It's not that uncomfortable.
Well, this kind of segues into the next article I had here. Apparently, Palestine is going to be the test bed for Trump's plan to tear up the rules based on international order. And under cover of a supposed peace effort or deal of the century, that's how they're describing it, it looks like Trump's administration wants to kind of throw out the concept of international humanitarian law, potential crimes for war crimes,
The potential for war crimes trials.
Yeah.
Well, that gets back to John Bolton, who was coming on out there lambasting the ICC. And we're seeing both the United States and Israel are literally coming out with statements saying, we're not subject to international law anymore. We have the right to go into other people's countries. We have the right to just do what we want.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very dangerous situation, I think.
Well, the Palestinians are kind of in the center of this battle because they're one of the most bothersome, troublesome, if you will, legacies of a post-war rules-based international order that the United States wants to just throw away. And if you take away the Palestinian cause, an injustice that has been festering for more than 7 decades, then America's hand will be freer elsewhere. Might will again make right.
Well, that's how the U.S. foreign policy has been running for the last 17 years.
Yeah, it's, and I mean, this aid was to go to hospitals. How do you hit against sick people, Mike? I don't understand this.
Again, the people who are at the very top of these governments, they're oblivious to the concerns of ordinary people. They just see them as human livestock, and certainly within Israel, which is in fact, heavily entangled with the Jewish religion, the Palestinians aren't really seen as human beings. And Israel's propaganda continues to dehumanize them. And once they're no longer seen as human beings, it becomes easier to just go ahead and do whatever you want with them. We're seeing the same thing going on with the constant Russia bashing. We're seeing it going on with the war propaganda against Iran, to basically dehumanize them so that the American people will say, well, they're not real human beings. They're not us. And therefore, it's okay to do what we're doing, which, of course, is a big, huge lie.
Yeah. I'd like to bop over to China. I know that you covered this on the website this morning. Did you cover it in your first 2 hours?
No, I didn't.
Okay. China has launched a very chilling social credit system, and it's straight out of the worst sci-fi you can possibly imagine, and it's already on. And with this social credit system, people can be punished or rewarded for what they do and how they treat the government, what they think about the government, what they say about the government. But guys, calling it chilly is no less than what we're starting to experience and have been experiencing with algorithms in Google, Facebook, YouTube that suppress certain results.
And all the financial information that's going on. Yesterday we were talking about how the next generation iWatch contains quite a few biomedical sensors. It can even take your EKG and detect fibrillation in your heart. And John Hancock Insurance Company is now going to tie all future life insurance policies to wearing that watch. If you don't have that watch and you're not sharing the data with John Hancock, you don't get a life insurance policy from them. And so John Hancock will basically be looking over your shoulder, actually over your wrist, to make sure that you're exercising regularly. And it really is reaching a ridiculous point. But this will eventually be global, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think so. And apparently China now has some 200 million CCTV cameras, according to Australia's foreign correspondent paper. And that means no matter what you do, you're going to be surveilled. If you're in your home, you're boiling water for tea, you're going to be surveilled.
Well, I don't know that the CCTV cameras are in the homes, but then
Not yet.
who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
we've got 2 cameras here plus the one on the phone,
Yep.
and
And I don't want a Siri in my home at all. I don't want things.
too late.
Well, I know you've got one for the watch, but
Yeah, I have to turn it on, or it won't work with the car.
right.
Okay.
I know, but nothing more than that. I'd like to turn over now to another article about China, and this involves Australia. Apparently, the news just broke that Australia is planning to return to the Lumbrum Naval Base in Papua New Guinea's island of Manus, which it did occupy before the country's independence in 1975. Now, Mike, there are a number of reasons why this is important. They used to run a so-called offshore immigration camp until it was closed last year because of the way people were being treated. And another driving factor is Australia's interest in competing with and ultimately curtailing Chinese influence in the country that Canberra regards as falling within its sphere of influence, which joins with fellow Quad allies' desire to contain China in the broader South Pacific region. Now, the reason this is strategically important is that it could well expectedly herald a U.S. military naval presence here, which could allow the U.S. to control the sea space between that island and Guam, essentially cutting China off from the rest of the South Pacific in the event of any great crisis between the two powers.
I have this idea, okay, because if there isn't a crisis, China's cargo ships are still going to be sailing everywhere.
Yeah.
It's international waters.
Yeah.
And so they're just spending a lot of money to say, we got to be here just in case. And I don't know how they expect to contain China to the South China Sea, absent actually going to war, which seems to be what they're talking about here, getting ready for a war with China.
And the way that China normally has its influence is by using grants, loans, and investments, which are part of the One Belt, One Road, or OBOR, global vision of the New Silk Road connectivity. And I really have to say that China conceived of something that sounds practically like it could really be good, because it would speed up.
It's going to be very good.
Yeah.
The problem is it threatens established means of transport. It threatens shipping lines. It threatens cargo planes. One of the reasons that the U.S. is trying to keep the two Koreas from reunifying is because were that to happen, then China could run a line of the One Belt, One Road all the way down into South Korea, right into the heart of that manufacturing district.
Yeah.
And they could basically, grab those products and have them in Europe in just a fraction of the time that it would take to send them by sea.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is all about maintaining things as they are now and not allowing anybody to come up with a newer, better idea.
Yes, I agree. Apparently, the U.S. Air Force is testing Reaper drones for air-to-air combat. And apparently, an MQ-9 Reaper drone has bagged its first air-to-air kill of another small aerial vehicle in a controlled simulation. And there was a very successful test late last year, and it demonstrated to the U.S. Air Force that an unmanned aerial vehicle like the MQ-9 does have the ability to conduct air-to-air combat, much like its manned fighter brethren, such as the F-15 Eagle or F-22 Raptor. Now, Mike, what happens when it's drones hitting drones?
Well, at least we're not seeing people getting killed, but I have to tell you, my skepticism-o-meter has gone off on this one.
Oh, really?
Because
talk to me.
When you're talking about an F-15 or an F-22, well, the F-22 is still asphyxiating its pilots, but you're talking about aircraft that are designed for high-G maneuvering for air combat, air-to-air combat. And the Reaper drone isn't built to do that. It was originally built to just be this long endurance, long duration surveillance platform.
Yeah.
And as it's been weaponized, they have to respect those weight limits. Now, they may be thinking that the Reaper drone will simply sneak up on an F-22 or an F-15 from the rear and hit them with a missile. That certainly might be possible. But if any experienced air combat pilot got eyes on the Reaper's going to be toast.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, apparently a couple of credit card companies are in hot water.
Good.
And wound up with having to pay a $6.2 billion price fixing bill. And most of us have credit cards we use once in a while. But the perps here were Visa and MasterCard. And what they did was they admitted to running a card cartel. And the article goes on to say that millions of Visa and MasterCard customers have what I would call a hug and a punch relationship with their credit card provider. While the ability to buy goods is convenient, there are sporadic service interruptions and security risks which take their toll.
Those are the big ones, plus all the hidden charges.
Yeah. And probably people do have this hug and punch relationship. But we are not alone, because merchants are equally weary of Visa and MasterCard and their punitive fees. And apparently they were able to do something about it rather recently. Shares in JP Morgan, Chase, Citigroup, and Bank of America will form part of the payment, which is going to be given by Visa and MasterCard to end the price-fixing lawsuit. Now, under the settlement, MasterCard will be obliged to pay $108 million. But Visa's got the harder part, coughing up a really large $4.1 billion. And to place the credit card's issuer's combined bill of $6.2 billion in context, from a cryptocurrency perspective, that's greater than the market cap of EOS and just behind Bitcoin Cash.
Well, again, especially in this economy, and especially as the Federal Reserve is talking about raising the rates again, the prudent thing to do is to get your credit card bills down as low as possible.
Yes.
And I've actually gone into stores. I mean, Claire and I prefer to do everything in cash, where you're not paying an interest payment, you're not paying a hidden fee, and the merchant gets the entire price for the product without having to share a bit of it with the credit card company. And the credit card companies are taking it off both ends, because they're getting money from the store, from the retailer, and they're getting money from you, both in interest and for those cards that have a yearly charge, they're getting that as well. So they're just raking in the dough here.
Absolutely.
But it's time to really think about getting that credit card down. And if you can't pay cash for something, do without. Just stop looking at all those TV commercials about the latest fashions and the latest cosmetics and the latest toy and the latest that, and just put those credit cards away. In a safe place in your home. Don't even have them. Have one with you in case of an emergency, and lock the rest of them up and get them all paid down. That's our advice to you, because those credit card companies, when the economy tightens up, those credit card payments are going to go through the roof.
They are. Interest, which is compounded in the Western system of banking, will make it almost impossible for you to pay off your cards if you don't really start soon.
Yeah, that compounding of interest, where they're charging interest on the interest.
Yeah. Another area I'd like to go to, the rise of spying transit police. And what is going on around this country is nothing less than completely dystopian and Orwellian. And apparently last year, BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, was accused of creating an app that spied on commuters' travel plans, texts, and emails. That doesn't make me feel warm and cozy about getting on a train or a bus. And apparently...
We got to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
So we'll come back to this story after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're covering this story about how transit systems are now starting to basically spy on their passengers. And before we went to the commercial break, we were talking about how the Bay Area Rapid Transit was accused of creating an app that spied on commuters' travel plans, texts, and emails. And at the same time, the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation Authority began a pilot program that used facial biometric body scanners to spy on commuters.
Yes.
And we're not exactly sure why about that. Now, over in southeastern Pennsylvania, at their transportation authority, they've unveiled what's called the SEPTA Transit Watch that allows commuters to basically spy on each other. And the app also sends commuters BOLO alerts, be on the lookout, basically turning their commuters into transit police spies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, setting aside the Fourth Amendment implications here, what are they going to do with all this data? I mean, I understand having TV cameras inside the train cars as a deterrent to somebody getting out of line.
Mm-hmm.
But all this surreptitious surveillance isn't a deterrent because people with bad intentions don't know it's going on until it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I rarely ride public transit. You know, I don't want to be surveilled. I frankly don't like it. I haven't done anything wrong. I just don't like it.
Oh, I don't either. I mean, again, I don't have a problem with the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a problem with the microphones listening to what I'm saying.
Yes.
And I do have a problem with them basically prying into my cell phone
Mm-hmm.
to try and figure out where I'm planning to go next.
Yep. Absolutely.
That really is inappropriate.
And the next article I found deliciously ironic. Bill Clinton's former War Room director is quietly advising the Kavanaugh accuser. And Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, is getting advice from Democratic super activist Ricky Seidman. Now, this comes to us from Politico. She's currently an exec at a PR firm, worked for the Dukakis, Mondale, and Clinton campaigns for president. She also served as Joe Biden's communication director when he was named Barack Obama's running mate in the 2008 election, and managed the confirmation of Obama's Supreme Court Justice nominee, Sonia Sotomayor. And she's also served as the executive of the very liberal voter group, turnout group, Rock the Vote. And she served in Clinton's War Room and served as deputy communications director in the Clinton White House, according to Politico. And I have to find this ironic because considering all the womanizing that Bill Clinton has done in his life with women like Paula Jones, the irony of this lady advising Kavanaugh's accuser, it's just too rich. It's just too amazing.
Well, again, you know, the double standard is clear.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a Democrat, well, obviously, you know, his accuser is lying.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a conservative, oh, absolutely. Forget about demand of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Accusation equals guilt.
Right. It's sort of a return to the Code Napoleon era, where one was considered guilty until one was proven innocent.
Well, see, that's the problem with Code Napoleon in the current context. Going along with the liberals' idea that we should simply believe Christine Ford,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, Kavanaugh assaulted her all those years ago. There's nothing Kavanaugh can say or do to prove his innocence.
Yeah.
He didn't have a camera back then. He didn't have a recording device going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's he said, she said. And if they're going to say we believe the woman, that's it. His reputation is destroyed.
Yeah.
And it is for that reason that when the Founding Fathers set up the United States of America, they abandoned any idea of Code Napoleon, and they went with this idea that everybody is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that was groundbreaking for the time.
Well, no, there were precedents for it in British law.
In UK,
but the idea here was that it was preferable to let some of the guilty go free than to punish an innocent person. And now, of course, we have the liberal Democrats foaming at the mouth, and they're out there to punish Kavanaugh. And, you know, we don't care if he's actually innocent. Sexual assault is such a serious crime. Innocence can't be used as a defense. He should just accept his guilt.
It's amazing. Turning back over to Project Veritas, for whom I have a lot of respect. Apparently, there was a social activist removed from his government auditor job over serious issues raised in Project Veritas video. In other words, the people who paid his paycheck had no idea that this guy was doing anything other than his work, which leads me to believe that he didn't have all that much to do.
Well, or he just was letting somebody else do it. But I think the reason they had to act is the video went viral.
Yes.
And in it, he says, yeah, I break the rules every day.
Yeah, no one's going to fire me.
And nobody's going to fire me. And they came out and said, you are now fired. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm watching Fox News, and there's yet another one of these ridiculous lawsuits against a bake shop where apparently a transgender customer wanted a cake, and the owner of the bake shop said, it's against my religious beliefs. And they're screaming, discrimination, discrimination. Just go to a bake shop that doesn't have a problem making the cake. That's the civilized way to handle this. And by the way, I remember growing up, going into places of business, and you'd see a sign on the wall, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. And this militant approach to transgenderism is going to backfire. When LGBTQ, PDF, BFD wanted acceptance, they got that. They should be happy. But now they're getting aggressive, and they want to sort of force the line forward. And Monday I'll have some additional stuff about that, because we're not going to get to that part of the talking points. Anyway, let's get back to Claire here. Claire, your next story.
Well, apparently the UK's SecDef, Gavin Williamson, is committing more British troops in Ukraine to stop what he calls Russia reversing the Cold War outcome. This man was protected by helmet and body armor, and he was looking at the remains of a hospital, walls bullet-ridden, windows blown out. The claim is made in this article, separatist fighters had targeted with mortars and machine gun fire from across the fields, which now represents illegal de facto border between Ukraine and Russia-occupied territory outside Marinka.
Okay, this is another big lie.
Yeah.
It's not Russian-occupied territory. Mm-hmm. It is the eastern Ukrainian republics who don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore.
Yeah.
They want to leave the same way that Crimea did.
Yes, absolutely. And here is where Mr. Williamson is doubling down. Britain is going to increase military support to its ally by sending Royal Marines later this year. Okay, guys, we're in the end days of September. That's not a long time. And increase the presence of Royal Navy patrols in the Black Sea in 2019. Did Putin or Poroshenko get the message on this?
Well, I'm sure they're paying. Well, I'm sure Poroshenko did.
Yeah.
You know, Poroshenko is trying to hang on to power. He's being seen by his Western supporters as having been ineffective at recapturing the Eastern Ukrainian republics. And ultimately, they want him to recapture Crimea so that they can kick Russia out of the Black Sea.
Yeah, yeah. And apparently the Royal Marines, Royal Navy is going to be in the Black Sea. Odessa, which is Ukraine's biggest port, is expected to come under pressure from the Royal Navy over coming months as they try to effect an economic blockade. What are these people thinking, Michael? Holy crud.
It's just putting more pressure.
Yeah.
You know, until finally something breaks and they get the war that they obviously want.
Yeah. Now, you covered this about Hezbollah leader claims group won't pull out of Syria, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and the fact that they do have guided missiles now.
Well, precision missiles is what they're calling it. But
okay. Iran made the observation this last week that they've got 3,000 to 4,000 working centrifuges. And it is still within the limit allowed under the nuclear deal with world powers, Ali Laranjari said on Wednesday. It's very interesting, though, because, Mike, usually the Iranians don't make announcement of specific data on their nuclear program public. And it was reported by the Tasnim news agency days after Iran's nuclear chief said it had completed a facility to build advanced centrifuges. And they will increase its capacity to enrich if the nuclear pact collapses as the result of Washington backing out of it in May. Trump should have known better. I think this is one of the worst things he's ever done, to withdraw from the P5+1.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the terms of that deal, the Islamic Republic can operate up to 5,060 first-generation centrifuges for 10 years at its Natanz plant and 1,044 first-generation centrifuges in its underground Fordo plant.
Okay, now when they're talking about the first-generation centrifuges, these are ones that are relatively slow. They're not designed to enrich to weapons grade. But again, under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran signed and ratified, they are allowed to create material for their own nuclear fuel rods, which, along with radioactive isotopes for industrial and medical purposes. But Iran never had a nuclear weapons program. This was ginned up out of thin air by the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to hear regurgitated, if you will, again.
Yep.
And President Trump has issued his drop-dead edict about people around the world not buying Iranian oil. Well, apparently, India is to pay for oil imports from Iran in rupees to skirt the U.S. sanctions. This is exploding in this guy's face like a bad cigar.
Yeah, we had a couple of articles earlier in the talking points where people are starting to say, this isn't working. It's backfiring.
Yeah.
It's going to result on the rest of the world just simply moving away from the United States.
Yeah. And they're saying that they're currently using European banks, but when November 4th comes, which is the drop-dead date for President Trump, local banks, IDBI and UCO, have chosen to route the payment in rupees. And by doing this, India and Iran will have struck an agreement that will allow them to completely skirt U.S. sanctions on Iran that will come into effect November 4th this year. And apparently the Indian government announced that it would make payments for oil shipments from Iran in rupees, and that Iran, in turn, could use these rupees to pay for imports from India.
So Iran is actually going to sell their oil, and India is actually going to do very well out of this deal.
Oh, absolutely. It's a win-win for both countries. And I have to look at this with the, by now, classic Captain Picard face palm and say, what is he thinking? Does he really believe that he's going to go to war against all the nations that won't be observing the U.S. sanction?
He may be thinking exactly that. They're already going to war with any nations that are trying to break free of the U.S. dollar. They did it in Iraq. They did it in Libya. They're trying to do it in Venezuela.
Yeah. And apparently we may hear an old term from an older war that didn't go all that well for the U.S. Apparently, the Pentagon had been opposed to using body counts as war propaganda, particularly in Afghanistan, fearing that it would echo the failed strategy in Vietnam and alienating people from around the world. But recently, there have been efforts to sell President Trump on the Afghan war, and that seems to be changing. And all of a sudden, people involved are great in wanting huge death tolls out to the public to prove that the U.S. and its allies will remove all who oppose them at every turn, and are making progress in killing people.
Because that's the only thing this country is still good at.
Yeah. They're saying the length of the war is what is causing this pessimism. But Mike, if NATO High Command and the U.S. CENTCOM regarding Afghanistan had a brain cell to share between them, they'd be getting those troops out as quickly as it would be safely and negotiating with whatever government was left standing in Kabul for the oil rights, the rare earth minerals, and the opium poppies.
Well, if the U.S. pulls on out, the Taliban is going to go into Kabul and kick out the U.S. puppet rulers.
Yes.
Okay, and that's going to cut off that oil pipeline right of way, not to mention the flow of opium.
Right.
And the other issue, of course, is right now, with all these wars going on pardon me, all these wars going on, the United States cannot be seen to lose even one of them, or the momentum is lost for the war agenda. And that's why, even though the Syrian war is almost over, the U.S. is getting ready to escalate it and go right back on in and start the bloodshed all over again.
Now, I thought this was a pot kettle black issue, but apparently Iran and Israel are calling each other names over nuclear threats and asking the UN to take action. And yesterday, Israel said it was stepping up security around its atomic sites as precaution against threats from Tehran and its regional allies. Now, Mike, the Iranian government is many things. Stupid, they're not, okay? And they understand that if there was any kind of a first strike against Israel, the country of Iran would be molten glass about 10 seconds after.
Iran is not a first striking country. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. What they're responding to, of course, is Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent speech, where he was out there basically implying, yes, we're going to melt down anybody who's opposed to us.
And this was so ironic. The United Nations members should not turn a blind eye to these threats and must take firm actions to eliminate all Israeli nuclear weapons. That's what Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Gholame Khosrow, said in letters to the UN Secretary General. And you know, the guy's right. The guy's absolutely right.
Well, he followed on to say that the UN needs to force Israel to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Which Iran has done.
Iran has done, the United States has done, Israel has not.
No.
And Israel is still refusing IAEA inspections, which, as a side note, makes every single penny of your money sent to Israel illegal under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act.
Right.
Earlier we were talking about this additional $3.3 billion.
Yeah.
It's money stolen from you.
Yeah.
By your government illegally. It's a crime under U.S. law.
And Mike,
they send it off to Israel.
Yeah, and Mike, here is my tack on that. No president can say, let's bring America back again and make America first. Throw this kind of money at a foreign country, in my mind, when we have count them, one homeless vet sleeping in our streets.
I absolutely agree.
We need to get this money used for domestic problems that are bad and getting worse. Going back to Syria, apparently U.S. Marines held 8 days of drills with militants in southern Syria. And Colonel Sean Ryan, a U.S. military spokesperson, said that the drills were a show of force and that the Pentagon had notified Russia through deconfliction channels to prevent miscommunication or escalate tension. Oh, I'll believe that when pigs can fly.
That's exactly what it was being designed to do.
Yeah. The U.S. is again playing the picador, trying to goad Putin. Putin's a pretty cool cucumber, though. I don't think he goads easy.
Yeah, well, earlier in the day, we had a caller who called in. There are now indications from multiple sources that French frigate may have had something to do with the downing of the Ilyushin 20. And that was the provocation that was designed to get Russia to shoot back at them.
And they didn't.
They did. And Putin basically just switched it over to tragic accident involving Syria and didn't buy. Doesn't mean there won't be another provocation down the road.
Yeah.
But it does remind me of when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, all the planted evidence was pointing at this was a Cuban plot.
Right.
That Cuba had assassinated our president,
Yes.
and to rile the American people up for a new Bay of Pigs, a new Cuban invasion, which would have triggered a nuclear war. Right. So Lyndon Johnson basically got rid of all the fake evidence, planted new fake evidence saying it was just all Lee Harvey Oswald, and we don't know why he did it.
Yep.
And I don't agree with lies and cover-ups, but obviously given the implications of averting a nuclear war with the Soviet Union, I do have to agree with what Lyndon Johnson did.
Yeah, me too. Apparently, these 8 days of drills ended this week at the U.S. military outpost in Tanaf, which is about 24 kilometers west from the Al-Tanaf border, crossing between Syria and Iraq and Holmes' government. And Colonel Mohammed al-Tala, the commander of the U.S.-backed Maghawir al-Thrasa militant groups said. And interesting the way he phrased it, he told Reuters that these war games are the first such exercises. And I'm looking at these words, Mike, and it means to me that there are going to be more of these exercises.
Well, yeah, live fire, air and ground assault involving hundreds of U.S. troops.
Right. Thavra claimed that the drills were meant to send what he called a strong message to Russia and Iran that the Americans and militants intended to stay and confront any threats to their presence. Now, Mike, am I wrong in sort of recollecting that the Syrian government never invited the U.S. over as they did with Russia?
No.
Okay?
It's the American presence in Syria is illegal. The United States has no right to be there. They were not invited by the Syrian government. They do not have the permission of the Syrian government. The United Nations Security Council has not issued a resolution authorizing the U.S. to go into Syria. The United States Congress has not issued a declaration of war authorizing the United States to go into Syria. It's just, presidents saying, "Yee-haw, I'm going to go and prove how butch I am," by sending other people's children into these war zones where they get ground up like meatballs.
And we also have the development of the Russia Armed Forces kicking off snap drills in the Eastern Med, which will last until 26 September, which is middle of next week. Now, the experts claim that the drills are a show of force and warning to Israel following official statements by top Russian officials that the Russian actions, this is how they're playing it, which led to the IL-20 shootdown on September 17th, are unacceptable. And apparently, the advisor to Turkish President Erdogan, Yasin Aktay, described the Israeli attack as an attempt to sabotage the Russian-Turkish agreement on the Idlib demilitarized zone.
Well, the timing was just too cute.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Apparently, the U.S. Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, repelled an ISIS attack on their positions in the settlement of al-Baguns, al-Fakwani in the province of Deir ez-Zor. They destroyed a couple of VBIDS. Mike, what is that?
It's an armored transport, I think.
All right. And now they are developing advance under the direction of al-Sulah. The Russian military is making steps to upgrade security in its bases in security and installation of upgraded control systems. And that is at one of its technical facilities. That's what...
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials here.
All right.
And we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And I think we got a couple more stories here to get on out.
Yeah. This was a story from Zero Hedge, which I felt was very interesting today. And the title was Suspending the Constitution. In America today, the government does whatever it wants.
Yes, true.
And it appears that for the last 17 years, we have been terrorized, traumatized, and tricked into a semi-permanent state of compliance by a government that really doesn't give a flying frisbee about our lives or our liberties.
I think it goes back a lot further than that. It's been a long, slow process of turning we the people into we the sheeple.
Yeah. Now, the article goes on to state that the boogeyman's names and faces may change over time, terrorism, war on drugs, illegal immigration, but the end result remains the same. Our unquestioning acquiescence to anything the government wants to do in exchange for the phantom promise of safety and security. And Mike, we, the people, have neither of those right now.
No, we really don't.
Yeah.
And I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, those who trade their freedom for security will wind up with neither.
Yes. Yeah. And a companion article, which I felt was very nice, when Pharmaceutical Vaccine and Medical Devices Corporation rule the world's healthcare industries. And then an addendum, too late, it already has. And it talks about how drug companies and their power are turning doctors into pushers.
Yes.
And pushing medication that may not even be safe for that end user to be taking.
Nope.
And that this really, really needs to change. And they also talked about the 2010 U.S. Supreme Court decisions, Citizens United, that gave greedy, super wealthy, sociopathic corporations the same rights as normal criminals with regard
normal
to
citizens.
With regard to spending unlimited amounts of money on election campaigns.
You know, we talked about that earlier in the show, and that's when the politicians stopped listening to the American people and started sucking up to the ultra wealthy.
Which is where the process is now. You know, I could call my representatives, Mazie Hirano and Brian
Schatz is ours.
Yeah. In fact, I've left messages for them. They've never called me back.
Oh, but I get lots of junk mail from him.
You do?
Yes, I do.
That's crazy, considering
the little Halloween story here.
Oh, you need to share that with you.
Actually, we're almost out of time here,
All
so
right.
you need to sort of sum up.
Okay. But when drug reps hire people to go and interface with doctors and medical teams, they're very articulate, they're very well dressed, they're very well spoken. But a lot of times, the only thing that doctor knows is what is given to him or her in this slick little booklet about the drug.
Yes.
None of the problems are there. None of the risk-benefit ratios are there. And Mike, this has got to change.
Well, in a lot of cases, these, so-called medical journal articles are fraudulent.
They're ghostwritten.
The pharmaceutical industries are literally hiring scientists. Write me a scientific article that promotes the benefits of our drug.
Right.
And then it's published in the scientific community's equivalent of a vanity press, where there are scientific journals out there that'll publish anything if you pay their fee.
Right.
And then once it's there, you can say, this is an article that appeared in the Journal of International Fuzz.
Yes.
And there we are. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. And stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with the people that you know. Please keep reminding everybody that Twitter, Facebook, Google, and YouTube are heavily censoring content. Please donate. We need your money.
Yes.
More than Israel does, we need your money.
Yes.
So we'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.